Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, is the weird old man that lives upstairs. It's Mr. Matt Bradigan. How's it going, Matt?
It's doing well. Yep, that's my name.
Bradigan?
Yeah, like the villain in The Great Mouse Detective.
Wow, that's a throwback. That's a good movie.
Yeah, we should do an episode on that.
Sure, why not? But this week on this show, we are beginning our third story of season 2, Low Men in Yellow Coats. It's the novella that takes place in the Hearts in Atlantis series of short stories and novellas. This week, we're going to be discussing chapters 1 through 4 of the novella. We meet our protagonist, Bobby Garfield, who develops a friendship with his upstairs neighbor, a nervous and strange fellow that we might recognize as Mr. Ted Brodigan, facilitator extraordinaire. Matt, what did you think of the first 4 chapters of Low Men in Yellow Coats?
I think that this book might be my favorite of any of the season 2 books, and we've only just started it. I think it's the best written by a country mile. I'm just like totally engrossed in this, more or less mundane story of this boy and his mundane struggles. I mean, obviously there's a tinge of the supernatural here and there, but that's not what's hooked me, right? It's not. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because like this is no dig on Insomnia specifically, but like one of the things that kind of kept me going in Insomnia was like, what's going on? What's the deal with this insomnia? But this, I'm interested to find out what the deal is with the low men. But the thing is, I already know because of the Dark Tower. So in actuality, I'm just invested in the story of Bobby because I don't really know what the story of Bobby is.
Sure.
Technically, I've seen the movie Hearts in Atlantis, but I really don't remember it very well at all. So I don't know. I think it really speaks to the power of the writing that I'm as invested and engrossed as I am.
Yeah, it's really funny because we've been talking about Stephen King for almost 2 years now, and still one of, I think, the most important things he does is something we really haven't talked about very much, which is writing children. We got a little bit of it with Jake Chambers in the Dark Tower. We got a little bit of it with Mark Petrie in Salem's Lot, but we've never really gotten to sit in a child character's point of view for a long time. And that's what this story is. This is the story from the perspective of Bobby Garfield. And I agree with you that like Stephen King, the way he writes kids, it's one of his greatest strengths. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how he has this incredible acute memory of what it was like to be a child or something, because when I read King writing children, I remember things about childhood that I just would not have remembered otherwise. And it doesn't matter. Like, this story takes place in 1960. I was not a kid in 1960. I wasn't born, but there's something, while being specific to the era, there's also something timeless about childhood that he captures in these characters. And that's honestly what I was looking forward to the most with you with this is finally getting to do a Stephen King writes a kid story. And I'm so excited for all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been feeling inspired to try my hand at writing a short story from kid perspective, because by default, not something I normally would do, but he's kind of reminded me like, wow, like your emotions are actually the strongest when you're a kid. There's so much natural drama there from a narrative perspective. Yeah.
And this has made me want to go read it again. Anytime I read Stephen King kid stories, I'm just like, I got to go read that book again.
That's great.
But first, Low Men in Yellow Coats. I don't think we have any announcements this week, right? Just a typical week.
Yep. Back in the normal swing of things.
Yeah, we're all back and healthy and good to go. So let's waste no further time and get into Low Men in Yellow Coats. As I said in the introduction, Matt, this is one of 5 novellas and short stories that exist within the 1999 collection titled Hearts in Atlantis. It was published in September of 99, so this will be 6 years since Insomnia and 4 years before King would publish his marathon sprint to the end of the Dark Tower. It's 2 years after Wizard and Glass, the 4th book in the Dark Tower, was published. And, of course, if you remember, it roughly 3 months after King almost died in a horrific car accident.
So just to ask the question, maybe we already know this, but how much, if any, had he written before the accident?
The book was done. The book was done.
The book was done. It just hadn't been published. So
yeah, I believe the thing he was specifically working on at the time of the car accident was on writing his memoir, and then of course he changed that around a lot. And I think originally it was, before the accident, it was literally just a book about writing, and after the accident he kind of morphed it into a memoir slash writing book.
Yeah, which is also what the Dark Tower is.
That's true. That's true. Hearts in Atlantis, the collection itself, is kind of unique within King's short story collections. Each story within this collection builds off each other. They're connected to each other. There's characters from some that we'll see in others, and it kind of circles around the same general themes. I want to hold off on discussing those themes because I think it will spoil some of the stuff that happens in this story in particular, but maybe we'll circle back around to that at the end of this particular story. Though I will say, just in general, I really, really, really love this collection. It's one of my favorite of his short story, quote unquote, collections.
Awesome. I didn't know that the stories in the collection were thematically connected. So now that you've mentioned that, I'm even more excited. Yeah,
it's I thought long and hard about whether or not I wanted us to just read the entire book, Hearts in Atlantis. I really went back and forth with this a lot, and I know we got some emails from folks begging us to do it, and I understand why. At the end of the day, I decided, no, we've got so much to do in this season that we're just going to focus on the one that relates the most to the Dark Tower and move on. But I think generally, my recommendation for you, Matt, and for anyone else that has never read Hearts in Atlantis is, once we finish the coverage of this, keep reading the rest of it. Do it, because they're all great stories. I think what this book is doing is really wonderful. Just not quite as Dark Tower-ish as Low Men and Yellowcoats is.
Cool. All right.
But as you said, for the purposes of this show and this season, we're going to be looking at just Low Men and Yellowcoats, which is the first story of the collection. As we'll see right away, the reason we're looking at this story is because it is a story of our good friend and Ted Brodigan and his vacation from Algul which is something we heard about in Book 7, The Dark Tower, which of course means, Matt, that we technically know exactly how this story is going to end. Or at least we know that at some point, perhaps not within these pages, but at some point, Ted will be caught by the Low Men and will be brought back to Blue Heaven to continue his breaker work, where he will meet up with Roland and his quartet. We know these things, which is a different angle on the story than I think people, and obviously than definitely people in 1999 were experiencing, but then other people would as well.
Of course, I think what's interesting from my perspective is that I just want to know, like, how does the thread between Bobby and his mom resolve, like that, like knowing that Ted gets caught at the end. I guess that's a spoiler or whatever, but I don't, that's not even what I was thinking about while reading,
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, some people say you should definitely read this story before you even get to Book 7 in Dark Tower. So people have arguments about that all the time. I don't think it matters. I think that the thing that is most fascinating about this story is Bobby Garfield. Bobby is our protagonist. Ted Brodigan is in the story, and he's an important part of the story, but Bobby is what matters here, and what is going to happen to Bobby and what he goes through and his relationships are the most important. And yes, we do know that one of the things that they use to hold over Ted's head in Book 7 is the threats that they make to Bobby Garfield. So we know that, but we really have no idea anything to do with this guy. And so, yeah, the quote unquote end, but you don't know a thing about this kid. And that is, as always with Stephen King, the most fun part of the story.
Yeah. And in any case, he very often tells us what's going to happen in advance, and it's still the fun of watching things unroll. That is the joy of the book. So even if I did know more than I know, I think I'd still be into just like, okay, well, but how does it unfold? So. And
how does Bobby react to the Low Men? Like as they become inevitably become a bigger and bigger presence in the story.
Right.
So the book itself opens with 3 quotes. they're more into relation to the collection as a whole. So I don't think I want to read them, because the only way I could like read them and analyze them is by kind of revealing what I think that the overall theme and motifs of this collection is. So we'll hold off on that just now. But Low Men in Yellow Coats specifically has one quote attached to it as we begin. It sets the date in 1960 and then says, "They had a stick sharpened at both ends." This is unsurprisingly a quote from Lord of the Flies, a book that is directly referenced within this story and like 20 other Stephen King stories. So, and it's, I think we can kind of maybe start to guess why this quote in particular is here.
Yeah, well, so first of all, it's like a perfect encapsulation of the themes of Lord of the Flies, where it's sort of about the self-destructive tendencies of humankind, viewed specifically through the lens of, young men, boys. I don't know, what did you want to riff on that a bit?
No, I mean, I think one of the other things that I was thinking about with this and doing some cursory research into this particular image within Lord of the Flies itself, it's also a biblical reference to David and Goliath, because that is what was done to when David defeated Goliath. He sharpened a stick at both ends, stuck one head on Goliath and the other into the ground, and so it was like a symbol of like showing that you're going to commit like a threat of violence to others by a display of violence to one. And I think that does tie into Lord of the Flies, because I think in the book itself, they're going to hunt. God, it's Ralph, I think. It's been so long since I read that book, I don't remember. They're going to hunt and kill Ralph, and they've sharpened a stick at both ends because they want to do the same thing. They want to stick his head on a pike and stick it into the ground. Yeah.
So, nightmare, just horrible shit. Yeah.
Just good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing about Lord of the Flies is, there's just this fun story about how, I don't remember if they were like Australian or British or what exactly, but like these young boys who were like exactly the same age as the Lord of the Flies boys. There were like 6 of them, and they got shipwrecked on some island. It was like exactly the Lord of the Flies scenario. And what actually happened was they just pulled together and hunted fish and had a grand old time and were eventually rescued, and they were just like totally healthy when they were rescued. So it's very amusing to me to know that like the actual, what humans will actually do is very often not just descend into our absolute worst nature. This isn't a criticism about the book Lord of the Flies, because it's a book. It's trying to make a specific point, but I just think that's kind of an uplifting little counterpoint to bring up in this context.
No, I think you're right. For sure. I mean, I think in the context of this story in particular, you can also argue it is representative of a kind of loss of innocence, which is, as we meet Bobby Garfield, we very quickly see him as a child on the cusp of moving out of childhood and into young adulthood towards adulthood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, all right, let's begin Low Men in Yellow Coats. I almost said Lord of the Flies. I'm so discombobulated. So one thing King does with this book, Matt, that I don't think we've seen in any other stories he does, he doesn't, they're not technically titled chapters. They're just subsections. And each subsection has like a brief kind of event list of what's going to happen in this chapter. Like in here, chapter 1, it says a boy and his mother, Bobby's birthday, the new rumor of time and strangers. And I'm curious, like what your initial reaction was to this kind of structural motif of the book, or at least this short story.
I think I like it. It definitely reminds me of what we were just saying, King's tendency to kind of tell you what's coming. And even though this is about as vague as you can possibly get, it's still sketching. It's sort of like when a sketch artist just with 5 or 6 lines gives like the dimensions of the scene that he's about to draw. That's sort of what this is. It's setting a tone and a feeling and a direction.
It's really fun because, it kind of piques your interest, right? Like chapter 3 is a mother's power. Bobby does his job. Does he touch you? The last day of school. And you're just like, whoa, that's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
What's going to happen in these 20 pages or so?
Yeah, it definitely makes you want to turn the page for sure.
So the story itself opens not discussing our protagonist, Bobby Garfield, but instead kind of shining a light on his father. And I really like the opening sentences of this book. So I'm going to read him here and we can talk about it a little bit. Bobby Garfield's father had been one of those fellows who started losing their hair in their 20s and are completely bald by the age of 45 or so. Randall Garfield was spared this extremity by dying of a heart attack at 36. He was a real estate agent and breathed his last on the kitchen floor of someone else's house. The potential buyer was in the living room, trying to call an ambulance on a disconnected phone, when Bobby's dad passed away. So the first thing we learn about Bobby Garfield is his dad is dead, right? We learn he's an 11-year-old boy without a father, and as we'll see, with a complicated relationship with his mother. And we're going to be talking a lot about Liz Garfield and her and Bobby's relationship throughout this week's episode and the whole book. So we'll save that for later. But right now, I think this choosing to open the book by defining Bobby as boy without a father, I think is really important, because this is kind of why he's so immediately taken by Ted Brodigan, his new neighbor, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. He's missing a father figure, or really any kind of positive role model of any kind, especially of the male variety.
Yeah.
And so that's, makes perfect sense. Feels very organic. And, normally I prefer to avoid the specific kind of psychoanalysis, but we do know that Stephen King's father didn't stick around. So you can't help but make that connection. I think we might have some opportunity to talk about that later too.
Yeah, tons of opportunity to talk about that for sure. I really, obviously, as a person who is 36 years old, hearing Bobby Garfield or Randall Garfield passed away of a heart attack at 36, I'm like, fuck, what?
Yeah.
Are you attacking me directly, Stephen?
Yeah. You love to read a whole book about death and growing old, and then the next book starts out with, you can die at 36 too, by the way.
Yeah, especially since I am bald. So
yeah.
It's just like they're attacking me specifically here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my son is not 3, so I can't die because my son's not 3.
That's right.
It can't be like this.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but the sentence construction of start losing their hair in their 20s and then completely bald by the age of 45 or so, and then kind of turning it on its head by saying Randall Garfield was spared that extremity by dying of a heart attack at 36. Like, it's such a clever turn of words here that I just like. It immediately sets the tone for, I think, how clever and skillful the writing of the story is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to have this fun and also this kind of sardonic detachment. Yeah. I think is how I almost use the word nihilistic, and I'm like, no, this is the least nihilistic book ever, actually, but sardonic for sure.
I think that's the perfect word for it. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was looking for in my head, and you just pulled it out there. It's perfect.
Good.
So the story itself actually starts with Bobby and his mom arguing about a bike that he wants. He wants this new Schwinn bicycle for a birthday present. She says they cannot afford it. She has her old standby sayings of that their father didn't leave them with a lot of money, and hints kind of very, very out of hand that he had a gambling problem. She of course doesn't come right out and say it, but she says never met an inside straight he couldn't play, which is really interesting because it's one of many instances in the story where things are told to us, the reader, that we understand immediately, but Bobby, being a young boy, doesn't quite get it. Although it's arguable how much he does or doesn't get it sometimes.
Yeah. It kind of seems like there are certain things that he may be picking up on and realizing that maybe they're important, but not wanting to think about them.
Yeah.
It's I think that we're going to have a lot of opportunity to talk about that over time. And maybe you could say, maybe I will say that in a story that's kind of obviously going to be about coming of age and specifically the loss of innocence, part of that is coming to understand the implications of things that maybe you're already aware of consciously.
Yeah.
Like you know that this is the situation, but you don't know what that situation actually means.
Yeah.
So it will.
And I think a really standard part of that whole, coming of age genre of storytelling is the kind of realization that your parents are not these infallible, perfect creatures, and I think it's really interesting because Bobby's relationship with his mom is just so complex and confused, and there's a lot of resentment there, a childhood resentment for the boss of the family, and there's a lot of genuine anger there as well, but he definitely does not fully understand and have processed fully who his father was and who his mother is. There's we're going to get to it eventually, but we know here that Bobby's mother works as a secretary for her dead husband's old boss. And there's a lot of implications on what that exactly means and what is actually going on in that relationship. And it's just immediately really, really complicated. But from the perspective of our protagonist, it's kind of not, because he has, as you said, he hasn't fully processed, even if he's aware on some level, he's not fully dealt with the implications of any of these things because he's just not old enough to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some fantastic passages in here along those lines. I think my favorite, I don't remember where it is exactly, but it's something like Bobby knows how to handle her and how to respond to her, but he doesn't know that he knows. It's just part of who he is to behave that way. He doesn't think about doing it. He just does it. And I mean, I think about this kind of thing a lot as a parent and also kind of as a child. Like, I think about the fact that I have I've always felt like I could kind of see through my parents in certain ways that were kind of unnerving to me, because it's like, and I'm like, well, I spent all my most formative years learning how to understand the tiniest nuance of their expression. And then it's actually kind of unnerving on the flip side to realize like my kids are spending all the like massive brain power trying to like, deprogram and reprogram me. Which is why they, basically have me wrapped around their finger, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of specificity here, right? There, like the what Bobby is doing to kind of manage his mother is very specific to their relationship, but in that specificity is universality. And I think we've talked about this with King before. He gets very specific and detailed, and that is the way it becomes relatable. Because I think you're absolutely right. Regardless of the quality of your parental figures in your life, you do spend a lot of your childhood paying very close attention to the things that they do in order to learn how to best get what you want from them. And like and it's not even in like a malicious way. It's just what children do. It's just like part of children dealing with their world that they live in, a world that is entirely dominated by these figures in their lives. That's kind of what they do. And there is something, they're specific to how Bobby has to handle his mother that is specific to Liz Garfield and the things she's going through and the problems that she has and the person that she is. But also, yeah, this is just, everybody does this. And this is what I mean when I say like reading King writing kids reminds me of things when I was kids. Cause yeah, I haven't thought about the ways in which I like knew my parents' tics and size and like when they would turn around and when they would not. Like I haven't thought about that stuff in years, but yeah, I did know all that stuff without being consciously aware that I was knowing it.
The last time my mom visited me, we were having a conversation and we both made the same little verbal mouth click sound at exactly the same like nanosecond. And it was because we were expressing this, we were so in line that like I knew she was going to, it wasn't like I did it because I knew she was going to do it, but it was just a perfect mirroring thing. It's just an example of that kind of thing. But anyway, I like how nuanced Liz is. And so compare. Okay, so normally King has a lot of what you could call, tropey characters with big obvious monkeys on their back of one kind or another. They have a drinking problem. They have a heroin problem. The closest we really have to that is Randall Garfield, who had a gambling problem, and then he's dead now. He's not in the story. And Liz, it's much harder to penetrate what Liz's specific character flaws are. She seems more like just a very well-rounded, fleshed out person who's kind of shitty and kind of in a really horrible situation. Yeah. And it's hard to actually say where the she sucks ends and but her life is really hard begins, And I think that's, I don't know, that's great, actually.
It is. I mean, I think there's a question you can ask about Liz Garfield, and that question is she a good mom? And it's not an easy question to answer. There are things that she does in this week's reading that make you go, no. But yeah, she's a complex human being with a lot of stuff going on that our point of view character barely understands. And so it's not as if I want to give a pass to her, but it's a more complicated answer than I think you would think in a lot of stories. Because
Yeah.
I mean, there's especially when you're just trying to tell a story from the perspective of a kid. There's a very easy way to just make this story about how this kid learns about life while dealing with his terrible, awful, no good mother, and it's not quite that.
Yes, very, very much. That's well said, because there are so many books where it's like, here's how, this poor kid dealing with their abusive parent, and it's like, oh, is she abusive? I mean, she's definitely not great, but she's her own person. She's not just in the story to serve the function of being an antagonist for the boy. She's her own character, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. So Bobby does not get the bike for his birthday, of course, but he does get something else. He gets a library card, an adult library card. And because this is a Stephen King character, Matt, he loves it as much as he would love a new bike.
Uh-huh.
And as you said before, the story takes place in 1960. Stephen King would have been 13 in 1960, so just slightly older than Bobby. But it is pretty clear to me that King, in many ways, is Bobby Garfield. Like, he has no father, as you mentioned, an obsession with stories, like the talking and the love of going to see the monster movie. Like, Bobby Garfield feels very much like Stephen King.
Yeah, and even the idea that he's gonna absolutely love a library card as a gift. I think King knows his audience, because he knows that anybody who's reading a short fiction collection by Stephen King is probably a lover of reading, and thus will empathize with this character.
I don't remember. I mean, it's certainly true that I probably did not have a library card that let me check out any book at the library I wanted when I was young, but I don't really remember the transition to when I could do that. I don't remember that moment in my life.
Yeah, I just think libraries were just a much less big deal for us, because there was TV. So.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I felt like that was true over time, but I do have very distinct memories of like 7, 8, 9 being a kid that went to the library a lot. Because actually, when we first moved to Texas, I was living in a rent house while our home was being built, and we were like across the park from this little like branch of a library that was basically just a shack, but it was like a branch of the city's public library. And I would walk there every day during the summer, and I would go in the library and I would find a new book. Like, I have very distinct memories of that. So yeah, I think you're right. As I got older, because I think I didn't have cable when we moved to Texas. I don't think I got cable till I was like 11 or 12. So TV wasn't as omnipresent for me in my younger years, but so I don't know. I do remember having distinct memories of just loving going to the library. But
sure, I mean, my library memories are actually just going to the library at my school, where I would just hang out in the library and read books in the library, and I'd never even check them out, because I'd just be reading them in the library.
So on their way out the door, they meet their new upstairs neighbor. We've already talked about him. It's Mr. Ted Brodigan. Mrs. Garfield immediately does not like this guy because he's carrying his luggage in sacks. But as we said before, Ted, Bobby is anxious for a father figure, and so he's immediately curious about this man Ted, and so much so that he actually takes a chance at defying his mother. And I want to read this section because, again, this is a great example of King writing his best. It's so good. 3 or 4 steps into this journey, he stopped and looked back. He felt that his mom had been rude to Mr. Brodigan, that she had acted stuck up. Being stuck up was the worst of vices in his little circle of friends. Carol loathed a stuck-up person. So did Sully John. Mr. Brodigan would probably be halfway up the walk by now, but if he wasn't, Bobby wanted to give him a smile so he'd know at least one member of the Garfield family wasn't stuck up. His mother had also stopped and was also looking back, not because she wanted another look at Mr. Brodigan. That idea never crossed Bobby's mind. No, it was her son she had looked back at. She'd known he was going to turn around before Bobby knew it himself, and at this he felt a sudden darkening in his normally bright nature. She sometimes said it would be a snowy day in Sarasota before Bobby could pull one over on her, and he supposed she was right about that. How old did you have to be to put one over on your mother anyway? 20? 30? Or did you maybe have to wait until she got old and a little chicken soupy in the head? I love it, right? Like, we were just talking about how kids have this innate ability to examine and inspect and find the loopholes and the ways to manage their parents. But parents also like are such a dominant force in kids' lives that, true or not, there's this feeling that you know what I'm going to do before I do it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like if I'm having to work when my kids are home, I can tell just by like the specific quality of the silence whether I need to go check and see what's wrong, you know. And it's because I'm basically in the back of my mind like predicting everything that they're doing, even if I'm not actually watching. And that's yeah. So I do love that, and I love that that's such an important part of this book, is this like really rather, you know, unique feature of parent-child relationships, where it's just like there's nothing quite as all-consuming. And then also there's the fact that the child is meant to grow beyond the parent, and that all-consuming relationship is essentially designed to sort of break and then reform into something different.
Yeah,
it's rather remarkable when you really think about it.
Especially in this case, and when it's just, you know, it's one-on-one. There's one parent and there's one child, and so it's like they are the entire focus of each other's lives in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. No sibling. No, yeah, that's a good point. So I don't want to like get too theory crafty with this book, because okay. It just doesn't feel right. But I did want to say, like, one thing that I kept thinking about is like how much of this subtext is Ted aware of, because we know he's telepathic, and frankly, I don't remember exactly how telepathic he is, and then how, like, is he able to turn it off if he wants to, and things like that. I don't really remember that about Ted, and I kind of decided in my own mind over the course of this book, like, well, he's probably trying to keep his power on the down low because they're tracking him.
Yeah.
So maybe he's minimizing how much he uses it, but we definitely see him use it at least once. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I do think there is an interesting thing that happens here where Bobby is immediately curious about Ted, but Ted is also like immediately taken by Bobby in a lot of ways. And I think it's fair to read part of that as he's aware enough or has enough of the touch to recognize the complexity of his relationship with his mother and the not so healthy parts of it, and there's a little bit of worry and concern for him there, and also maybe he picks up on, as we said, Bobby's need for a father figure or desire to have that kind of figure in his life, and it's really interesting because on the surface, like, again, this is something that's unique to us because we know that he's on the run and hiding right now. He takes a lot of risks here. Like just like a person really on the run would probably just kind of want to fade into the background of any community they join. But like he makes it a specific goal to be a big part of this kid's life, which is a risk for him. And so it's almost as if he can't help himself. Like he sees something in this kid that he just needs to act on.
That's, yeah, I agree. I think I kind of felt all that subliminally, but never articulated it. But yeah, that does seem to be what he's doing because, yeah, absolutely right. He is behaving not in the way that you would expect necessarily based on what we know of him. Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing I want to talk about on this section we just read is the idea that the reason Bobby feels the need to turn around is because he feels his mom has done something wrong. She's acting stuck up, which among his circle of friends is the worst thing you could be. I think this is another one of those things, those liminal moments between, you know, childhood and young adulthood, where you're kind of in this transition, as we said, of discovering that your parents are human beings with flaws. And so to being aware that, hey, my mom behaved poorly there, and I have a responsibility as a Garfield of showing that we're not all like that. It seems to me as something like a younger child would probably not have had that line of thought, but Bobby is just old enough and just approaching this threshold that he's able to pick up on that and feels the need to act on it at risk to himself. Because I didn't count it here, or I didn't pull it here, but he goes on to kind of like look at his mom and then say goodbye to Mr. Brodigan, despite the evil eye that she's giving him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's the chafing and kind of growing away from the parent in that particular way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's which I've some things I've already started to notice with my oldest. Really, I mean, it's interesting, and it's funny because Stephen King keeps attacking me specifically with all these books that we're reading. But like, one thing that I've noticed kind of in my parenting self assessment recently, is like I can't speak to my oldest the way that I speak to my youngest, and it's very easy to fall into a pattern where you speak to all your kids in the same kind of way. And I know that sounds very vague. Like what I mean is like you can kind of be short with like a 5-year-old because you know they don't really care. Like they're not internalizing it. They're just like, you're like, don't spill that, don't, stop pulling on those glass chandeliers if we're out at the store. And they're just like, yeah, they're used to it. They're used to being like barked orders at, basically. Mm-hmm. But you say that sort of thing to an older kid and that like hurts their feelings because they're like, why are you yelling at me? Mm-hmm. It's kind of fascinating because it's like, well, I used to talk to you that way all the time, but now I'm no longer molding. I'm just kind of criticizing, and I'm making you feel bad. Is anything I'm saying making sense here?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think we talked about this on another show a few weeks ago, but that like the difference between kind of caretaking and parenting, mm-hmm. and how as kids grow older, like right now I am a parent, but I am really just caretaking. Like my kid, like I don't really have to. I'm not like teaching them how to be a human being yet, really. Just teaching them how to do basics of survival. And I think that's part of that. I think as kids grow older, like the ways in which you have to manage those problems shift, because that's part of what parenting is. So yeah, I think that's really fascinating.
I'm mildly concerned that people think that I'm just like yelling at my kids constantly. like
no,
what I mean is if you're like out in a store, sometimes you just have to be like, stop that, like it's not mean, but it would be mean if you said it to like a teenager. It would be like, oh, like that was rude, So,
yeah, no, I think you're spot on that. Like the older you get, the more you internalize that kind of thing. Where a young child, it's not just that's not what's going on in the brain yet.
It's the only way you really have of getting through to them. They're not going to understand anything other than that. So
mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. No. So then we meet Bobby's two friends, Sully John and Carol Gerber, the latter who clearly has a crush on Bobby, though he barely seems to notice it. Mm-hmm. We meet Sully John. He's got a bolo bouncer, which I just called a paddle ball. I don't know what you called it, but it was just a paddle ball to me.
Yeah, paddle ball. I didn't know what a bolo bouncer was. I was imagining some weird 1950s toy that I never heard of, but you're right. It's just a paddle ball. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just that flat, round wooden racket attached to a bouncy ball by an elastic string.
Yeah,
that's it.
Exactly.
And I think there's something that King is doing here that's so clever. Like we've already talked about this a lot, but these kids are basically 11 going on 18, right? They're at the cusp of puberty, at the beginning of starting to leave their childhood behind. And King is crafting these images very deliberately to kind of show them in this liminal state between the two. Like we got this boy jazzed about getting an adult library card so he can leave the kiddie stuff behind. A young girl who just gave the birthday boy a big kiss on his cheek, which he's embarrassed about because girls still. A birthday card that she gives him that's a little gushy, but like not too gushy. And then we have this young boy playing with a paddle ball, which like to me, paddle ball or bolo bouncers or whatever is like childhood in an image. Like it just, to me, it's just like, this is like a thing. It's just childhood. This is what a child plays with.
Yeah.
And then we have Carol wanting to skip to school, but's chastised for it because it's a little bit on the baby side. Like these characters are just like in the middle of these things where they're still doing a lot of kiddie things, but they're also aware of baby stuff, of gushy stuff, and they're still resistant to some of it. And it's really fascinating in between time for all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said a bit ago about loss of innocence, like this is the kind of like height of the derivative of loss of innocence. It's you basically have the fundamental blueprint of the mind that you're going to have as an adult, and you keep tripping over these like little horrible realizations about yourself and the world and the people around you that you were that previously were always there, but you were unaware of, and or were like you were just innocent to them because you didn't understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's I think why this is happening at this, at this age to these kids.
Yeah, and I to speak of the setting a sec, I don't think it's an accident. And I know it's not an accident that this is also occurring in the year 1960, right? Which is, if you think about our country, for a lot of people going through the 50s into the 60s, which was a much more turbulent time in America. And so like you have this image of the 50s as this perfect, happy time, which I mean, it was never accurate, but for the the purposes of this metaphor, like the innocence and the purity of the 50s, and then the turbulence and incredibly quick change of the 60s. And it is 1960, and these kids are on the cusp of starting to make their way to adulthood in a time in America where things are going to change rapidly, and there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff going on, and that is important to what the story is doing,
I think you're right. And King even gets to obliquely comment on some of that stuff by having Bobby's job be reading the newspaper to Ted. Yeah. So can actually comment on these direct things.
Absolutely. There is an interesting thing we have to talk about here before we move on very briefly. The story, at least to this point, is almost exclusively from Bobby's point of view. But there is this really brief moment at the end of this section where we cut into Carol's mind, where she kind of like looks at Bobby Garfield as she's walking just slightly behind him and thinking of how much she likes him and how much of a cool guy he is, because the coolest thing about him is that he doesn't know he's cool. And I'm saying this merely to set up something I'm going to talk about in later chapters, but is an interesting thing where he just kind of very rapidly switches point of view on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we'll get back to that.
Yeah. So on Bobby's birthday, he finds out that his mom has to go into the office and work late. So he finds himself all alone on his birthday, which is just makes me really sad.
Mm-hmm.
But he has plenty to do, Matt. He heads to the library to try out his new library card. And on his way home, he bumps into Ted on the front porch, and they have their first of many conversations. And this is, I think we kind of already touched on this, but I think this is one of those fun areas where, since we know exactly who Ted Brodigan is and we know what his power is, we get the feeling that he's picking up a little on what's going on in Bobby's head here. And so like, maybe he doesn't quite know, maybe like he doesn't learn that it's his birthday until Bobby says that it's his birthday, but he can tell that this kid's sad and maybe needs some attention from an adult on his birthday.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think, this is probably why he ends up taking to Bobby and offering him a job. And, I think maybe he sees him as a kindred spirit because Ted is also this book loving, scholar, basically. And he sees that. And maybe, I mean, we'll get to this later also, but it's possible that Bobby has the touch innately, and so that would be another way in which he's a kindred spirit.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, we haven't talked about this at all, but we've kind of been talking about the innate ability for a child to understand their parents and the innate ability for a parent to kind of predict their child's behavior, which is very true and true to real life. But also, maybe they both have a little extra oomph in that department.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a cool idea. It's the fun thing about the touch is it's basically just the genre trope, fantasyization of that kind of ineffable vibey thing that you do sometimes, where you look across the table at somebody and you make eye contact with them because somebody said something off color, and you both just kind of like nod slightly, and it's like, yeah, that was telepathy. Sure, that was the touch. I mean, I know it's not literally telepathy, but you know what I'm saying. Like that's what King is getting at, is the fact that we do this kind of stuff all the time, actually.
Yeah.
And the parent-child thing is a huge example of it.
Yeah, it's the Winkle, Matt. It's just the Winkle. So they start talking about Bobby's mother and talking about how she's a woman of a lot of sayings. The biggest one she has is tempus fugit, time flies. I know that's not how you pronounce that, but yeah, I don't know Latin.
That's how Americans say it. So whatever.
I think that's how our narrator of the audiobook said it, right?
I think it's probably Fugit, but everybody says Tempus Fugit.
Okay. And then I love another section of the book that I just love, Matt. Ben Jonson called time the old bald cheater, Ted Brodigan said, drawing deeply on a cigarette and then exhaling twin streams through his nose. And Boris Pasternak said we are all time's captives, the hostages of eternity. Bobby looked at him in fascination, his empty belly temporarily forgotten. He loved the idea of time as an old bald cheater. It was absolutely and completely right, although he couldn't have said why. And didn't that very inability to say why somehow added to the coolness? It was like a thing inside an egg or a shadow behind pebbled glass. I just love this idea that like this is how incredibly enamored he is with Ted Brodigan, that like he just throws away a Ben Jonson quote and it's like that's perfect. You have spoken to me at my core.
And also there's going to be a bunch in this book about how language rocks and books rock and writing rocks. So like there's just an example of Bobby becoming aware of the fact that one of the powers of a writer is the ability to like nail an idea to words in a way that is, timeless and perfect. And that's much like a lot of other Dark Tower stuff, it ends up being a kind of commentary on the power of writing.
Yeah, for sure. Ted looks at the books that Bobby has gotten from the library. He sees one of them is called Ring Around the Sun, and he says, in this book, he said, Mr. Simak postulates the idea that there are a number of worlds like ours, not other planets, but other Earths, parallel Earths, in a kind of ring around the sun. A fascinating idea, which is really just a long, complex way of saying there are other worlds than these. Yeah. He's being a little cheeky here, Ted, because he, of course, knows this to be the truth. He was just on another Earth, a parallel world. He knows that this is true, and he can't like. We don't see what's going on inside Ted's head at all in this book so far, right? But it's really interesting that like you got to think he's thinking about the people he left behind in El Golciento. He's thinking about the work that he was doing, and he's thinking about what they're going to continue to do there. Like, you got to assume that all these things are flying through his head at the same time. So anything he sees that remotely relates to his past experiences, he's like automatically making those connections.
Yeah. I never remember how much of a kind of midworldian he was, but you can imagine him seeing that book, maybe the first book he's seen in a while, and being like, that I would see this book out of all books,
Yeah, no, I like that.
I'm going to be honest, though. I am surprised at how much, Dark Tower stuff is in this book, because I just kind of assumed, for some reason, I don't know why, that a lot of the, Dark Tower low men stuff would be kept kind of vague and spooky in the background, and more Easter egg than overt reference. But King is a man of details and specifics, and so we're getting a lot more direct references.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the low men, this is the book, unsurprisingly, based on the title, that invented the concept of the low men that King then took and put in later Dark Tower stories. But there's like, I'm trying to think of the way to say this. There are other stories that King has kind of brought into the Dark Tower universe that were stories that existed on their own, and then King said, oh, that would be a great idea to include in my magnum opus. And yeah, I don't think you'd be wrong in getting the idea that the low men were this concept he invented specifically for this book, and then at a later date said, oh, I bet I can use them as kind of the gophers of my big bad in the Dark Tower. But no, I mean, we can see very early that's not the case. That how much of the final book he had planned at this point, he's making it kind of not 100% obvious, but like if you can read between the lines, that everything that we know about what Ted was doing in Midworld, he knew when he was writing this part, at least.
Yeah, I mean, probably. Forgive me for using you as Wikipedia, but had King used the concept of the beam in the Dark Tower prior to this book?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he was consciously thinking about that, because it occurred to me what if everything in this book was sort of standalone and then he later feathered it into the Dark Tower? But no, it sounds like he intended it to be a Dark Tower connection the whole time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
My favorite part of this whole conversation, though, is when Stephen King uses Ted Brodigan to lecture people on how to read books, which
Excellent.
is just, if it's so part and parcel for Dark Tower, right? Like, it's so funny to me. Like, Insomnia is a Dark Tower novel in that it is so directly related to the events of the Dark Tower, right? But in many ways, even this early in this reading, this feels closer to the feel of a Dark Tower story than Insomnia did to me, because of all this obsession with storytelling specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah. I that was one of the things that jumped out at me pretty quickly. The idea that this is a kid that loves reading and we're going to be talking about other books. I was like, oh, okay, this is why people keep saying that we should read this book as part of our Dark Tower sequence, because it's clearly like thematically a Dark Tower book.
Yeah. So Ted says, there are also books full of great writing that don't have very good stories. Read sometimes for the story, Bobby. Don't be like the book snobs who won't do that. Read sometimes for the words, the language. Don't be like the play it safers that won't do that. But when you find a book that has both a good story and good words, treasure that book. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it kind of makes me feel like I should give Lord of the Flies another shot because it's kind of placed in this category.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
King loves Lord of the Flies. That's for sure.
I mean, I say that because I haven't read it since they forced us to read it in, if I'm not mistaken, literally middle school, which I'm all for making kids read challenging things. But I just was not intellectually equipped to really get anything out of that book beyond like, oh, this is upsetting. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I think we're jumping ahead in our conversation here a little bit, but you need, if you're gonna read a challenging book like that at an age like that, you need someone like Ted to kind of talk you through the meaning of it. Like, I just don't ever remember having a conversation with any of my teachers, and maybe this is just not a reflection on teaching as a whole, but the individuals that I had, that was like, hey, I'm not sure about how I feel about the ending of that. What do I do? Like, I remember like book reports, especially in middle school, and book discussions were just regurgitating plot details.
Yeah.
That's it. We hadn't even gotten to the concept of a theme. And I mean, I don't even think Ted says the word theme when he's talking about Lord of the Flies. He's trying to relate that word in a way that Bobby would understand it. Like, what is the book about? What is the book saying?
Yeah. I mean, there's no need to use the word theme if you can convey that. Just like there's no reason to memorize that the conch or conch, depending on what part of the United States you're from, is a symbol that represents order and civilization. It's like it's that knowing that it's a symbol is secondary to like understanding the function that it serves within the story, right? So you know, it's funny because for all I know, my teachers were trying to have these mature conversations with the class, and we, including me, were just too dumb to really participate. But you know, this is why I think that when you're teaching kids how to read, you should teach them using like Harry Potter. Like, you should teach them with books that they are gonna want to read anyway. Yeah. And get their feet firmly grounded in the notion of like how to think about stories. And then when they're older and more ready for it, you can do Lord of the Flies. That's my opinion anyway.
And to be fair to any English teachers in the audience right now, I think it's a lot easier to have those kind of conversations in a one-on-one situation than it is with one teacher and 25 students. It's very, very difficult.
Oh yeah, no, that's pointless. Yeah.
So Bobby goes home and starts reading Ring Around the Sun, which he absolutely loves, which he describes as rip shit, which is, I love the words he uses. It makes him think about becoming a writer one day. So again, we see that Bobby is just Stephen King. But then his mom comes home. She's her lipstick is smeared, her slip is hanging out and exposed a little bit, and she doesn't seem like she's in a very good mood. So this is our first big textual hint that there's something very nefarious going down at the office. That we're told she works late a lot. Bobby is not exactly sure what she does, and we just can come out right out and say it. There appears to be some sort of affair that's being had with Randall Garfield's old boss.
I mean, my interpretation from what's happening right now is like it's an affair, and she probably wants it to be more than an affair, but he's probably, probably married and probably, pushing her off, and this is miserable for her. That's my interpretation of what's going on.
Okay.
Which may be wrong. I'm just, saying where my head is at this point.
Sure.
And it's also this kind of big dramatic source of tension because it's very intense. We really know, Bobby's going to figure this out at some point. He's figure out whatever's going on, and he's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And who knows how he's going to react. And, and this is, I think, at this point, much needed context on the character of Liz, because we've seen her kind of be mean to her son, but only from her son's perspective, which is just unfairly biasing. And now we're seeing like, okay, she's going through something rough. She's, then you begin to think like, okay, she's lost her husband. She has a child dependent. This is the end of the 50s, when that probably wasn't a great position to be in. Mm-hmm. She's got her boss sort of pressuring her. So, unlikable as she is superficially, she seems to be in a pretty objectively shitty situation. And
yeah,
I think this scene was important to get your head going in that direction.
Sure. I mean, regardless of the details of the affair, we do know that her boss wields a pretty tremendous amount of power over her, right? And that,
right.
She doesn't seem, they do not seem very well off. We have no idea the level of debt that Randall Garfield was in at his death. We just get this kind of cursory, he played cards a lot, and like, did he leave her with a shit ton of debt, and her old boss, or his old boss, comes in and says, "Oh, I'll take care of that for you, but it's going to cost you something." We just don't know the full extent of what this relationship is, and like there's a version where you go like, you're missing your kid's birthday, and maybe she didn't want to, but she doesn't feel like she has a choice. That when this man comes calling, she doesn't have a choice to go.
Yeah. You get the sense that she's self-hating, actually. Like
sure,
a lot of her, I guess I was going to say this in a later point in this conversation, but like my vibe from her is that she's just miserable. She's an incredibly unhappy person. And that trickles down and expands to consume everything else. And that is why she has a terrible relationship with her son, is just she's really unhappy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I love, but we can't do, like, we give this little window into what's going on in her life, and then we build complexity onto this relationship, right? Because I love this moment where hours later, Liz Garfield comes in and sits by her son's bed. She apologizes for not being present for his birthday, and it's very clear that she feels, that self-hatred that you were talking about. She's obviously very upset with herself for the way she acted around him, and I love this moment where he hugs her, and like, he never wants to stop hugging her. There's this thing that the book has done that we haven't mentioned quite yet, that where she doesn't physically touch him very often. She like never tussles his hair or anything, and there's moments where, like, when he does touch her, she kind of jumps back and is made uncomfortable. And we don't know the source of that very much, but I think Bobby is someone who's kind of like craving physical touch in a lot of ways, and he just doesn't get it from her very often at all. And so this moment where he hugs her, and like she hugs him back, and I love this line: Bobby was still hugging her. He could have hugged her for another hour easily, smelling her White Rain shampoo and Aquanet hold spray and the pleasant odor of tobacco on her breath, but she disengaged from him and laid him back down. Like, I love this idea that he's terrified of this woman. In a lot of ways, he doesn't like her and like is angry with her, but he loves her. He loves her so much, and is desperate for her attention and her love.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to say this in the right way, but like it's a very, very childish kind of feeling. Like it's you feel like there's a little 4-year-old Bobby reaching out inside of him and just needing that kind of reassurance and touch and knowledge that he is loved and deeply cared for. And the fact is he knows that he isn't, kind of, and that's why he has this desperation for that love.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right there. Yeah. All right. We need to move on to the next chapter because we, surprising no one that's been listening to us for the past 100 episodes, we are an hour into this episode and we have covered one of 4 chapters. So I'm going to try to go a little bit faster here in the next 3, Matt. Let's see how this goes. Chapter 2, Doubts About Ted. Books are like pumps. Don't even think about it. Sully wins a prize. Bobby gets a job. Signs of the Low Men. Another one that's really intriguing, right? To finish totally. With, the Low Men. Ooh. Mm-hmm. So despite his complex relationship with his mom, Bobby is still just a kid. And for a little while longer, he just wants to do kid things. And so now at the beginning of this chapter, we kind of go through the early spring where he's just kind of doing what kids do. He's hanging out with his friends. He's planning his summer vacation. He's saving and scrapping everything he can find for this bike he wants. It's as you talked about at the very beginning, it's King devotes pages to this, just like kids just hanging out and shooting the shit and being kids and enjoying their days. And it's just great stuff.
Yeah. And you're totally into it too. Yeah, you're not like, okay, let's get to the plot. You're like, oh, this is great.
And then one day, Ted gives him a belated birthday present, a book that has a good story and good words. It's the story we've been talking about for the last hour, Lord of the Flies, making this the billionth time King has brought this book up in his novels. After all, he did name his fictional town Castle Rock, which is the name of it's a mountain in Lord of the Flies. The name Castle Rock. I'm pretty sure. Okay. Not a literal mountain, but what they call a mountain.
I don't remember that reference, but I'll believe you.
It's true. This, of course, most closely relates our boy Bobby to Jake Chambers, who also encountered this novel back at his school. And then, of course, as we've talked about already, Lord of the Flies is a story about a group of boys on the cusp of manhood, just like Bobby is, and that loss of innocence, and a whole lot of other stuff.
And also, it kind of sounds like Lord of the Rings.
Sure, Matt. It does kind of sound like Lord of the Rings.
There, I got it in for the day. And it's also about the horribleness of humanity and about how adults are not better than kids in the way that Bobby probably hopes that they are.
I love his reaction to the question that Ted poses him. The quote from Carroll, I think. Lewis Carroll. I can't remember who the quote
I thought it was the author. I thought it was well, now I blanked on the author's name. But anyway, the author of Lord of the Flies. I thought that's who. But who's going to save the adults?
I thought it was another author commenting about Lord of the Flies, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is, who's going to save the adults? And Bobby's reaction is like, well, adults don't need saving.
Yeah.
Which is patently false.
That's
I mean, and explicitly false in this story because we have Liz Garfield who needs some saving, and we also have Ted Brodigan who is going to need some saving as well, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think that's one of those definitional moments of loss of innocence is realizing that adults are not different from kids. But I think my favorite, most relatable moment of the book so far was Bobby being totally engrossed in the ending of Lord of the Flies, finishing it, and then just being completely fucking shell shocked and just like dazed, sitting there on the bench, and just like being like people try to talk to him, and he's just like zoned out because he's so affected by the book.
I love it. I mean, I think everyone listening to this probably has had that experience before, where you're like, you kind of rush to a location, you have maybe 100 or less pages of a book that you're really loving left to go. And you are rushing to the spot you're going to go read it because you can't wait to get into it again. And then, I love the detail that he like looks up from the book and he's covered in little white flowers because I forget what kind of bush it is, but it's kind of flowered and rained down on him, and so he's like covered in these little white flowers and didn't even notice it because he's so in the book. Like it's this very, very like serene and beautiful, wonderful moment that I think we've all experienced in reading a good book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And like we said, because he's basically Stephen King, Bobby loves Lord of the Flies. Is the best book he's ever read, but he's not sure what to make of the ending. Was it good or bad, happy or not? He wants to go ask Ted, but his pal Sully John shows up and we got to talk about this relationship. First of all, I love how King writes kids. Here we have, nah, I think I'll hang around, Bobby said. Okay, Sully John scrummed a few apple blossoms out of his black hair, then looked solemnly at Bobby. Call me a cool bastard, Big Bob. Sully, you're one cool bastard. Yes, Sully John leaped skyward, punching at the air and laughing. Yes, I am. A cool bastard today, a great big cool bastard of a magician tomorrow. Pow! Bobby collapsed against the back of the bench, legs outstretched, sneakers toed in, laughing hard. SJ was just so funny when he got going. So what do you think of Sully John?
I love Sully John. He's delightful. He kind of reminds me of that one kid in Stand By Me. Which one, Matt? I don't know. It just as you said, King is great at these kid friendships. It's just like, yeah, I totally remember being like this, and it's delightful. I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this without getting too into the events of later in the book. There's a lot that we see here in SJ and Bobby that demonstrates them as extremely different people. Mm-hmm. Like the first moment is like the first time SJ sees him, he's like, "You finished that book yet?" "Yeah." "Did you like it?" "Yeah." And he's still kind of in that shell-shocked moment. And Sully John's response is, "Never met a book I liked." Like they're incredibly different people in that. And it's this kind of thing where you start to wonder, as they're in this liminal state, as they cross this big threshold, are these the type of people that remain friends once mm-hmm. they start to grow up a little bit? Or are they people that are so different that just kind of bonded in their shared childhood, but then as who they become kind of solidifies, are they too different to hang out mm-hmm. anymore? And I think, I don't know, I think I just, especially on this reread, I got a lot of that in this conversation. Like there's a lot going on here. Like SJ has won this week at camp, and Bobby is jealous of him in that. And I love that. Like, don't you just want to go with your family to Wisconsin instead of going to this really cool summer camp for a week? And Sully John's like, no. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's in a very subtle way, you're seeing cracks begin to form, I think, in mm-hmm, what like things that would otherwise just be completely brushed over and forgotten when they were younger are probably going to become sticking points. And I'm not even necessarily predicting they're going to have some like falling out. I think it's the more in reality, if this were a real friendship, it would be more a situation where they just kind of grow apart, and maybe, maybe they do see each other on holidays when they go back home for Thanksgiving or whatever, and they maybe have a beer together, but they're not really they'll never be as close again as they are now.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, maybe because you mentioned it, but I'm thinking of Stand By Me / The Body a lot, mm-hmm. which is when those characters kind of just naturally faded away from each other as they got older. And I mean, that's a thing that happens for sure.
I mean, I certainly don't have a single friend from the time that I was 11,
No.
So,
yeah, let me think. Nope.
I mean, that's at least in part because I moved a bunch of times, and then there wasn't, but still, I don't think I would anyway. So
the closest I have to that is our collective friend, Michael, who I met freshman year of high school. So I think that's 13, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And my oldest friend I met when I was 13 as well. So that's my friend David, who you've met as well. So that's, I think 13 is the latest that you're allowed to keep friends that you've made. Yeah.
You got to be a teenager first. You got to have that teen in your name, or you can't keep the friend. Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, I think even that's rare. He's the only one. And I mean, we're still good friends, and we don't see each other that often. We live completely different sides of the country. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Bobby says goodbye to SJ, meets up with Ted to chat about the ending of the book. He still doesn't quite understand what Ted's trying to say, but that's okay, because as Ted says, it's okay to not understand. It's okay to be confused, because books don't give up their secrets all at once. This is once again King just lecturing us on how to read, and I just love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. He's, wink, 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 pay attention.
Yeah. Then Ted offers Bobby a job. He wants him to read to him during the day, but that's just a ruse, really. What he wants him to do is keep an eye out for our titular low men in yellow coats. Ted explains what these low men are. I'm not going to reiterate that, because you and I really kind of know they're the slimeball, gross guys who are actually Taheen in disguise. But what do you think of King's description of low men here, Matt? Does it match what we see later in the Dark Tower? Does that kind of align with your understanding of what the low men are?
Not perfectly, because my understanding of the low men from the Dark Tower was more that like they love the idea of becoming people, but they just had a really deranged impression of what people are. And I can kind of force it to fit by just saying like, okay, well, that's their manifestation in this book, is they look like sleazy gangsters basically, because that's what they think men should look like.
Yeah.
That's and I've probably also forgotten some of the details of how the low men were portrayed. I am kind of excited to see how they're described physically, because of the fact that they're wearing horrifying skin masks. So that'll be fun.
Sure. I think one thing, and I don't think we're prepared to answer this question just yet, but it's something I want us to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the story. These were characters that, relationship to the Dark Tower, regardless, they were created for this story. And so one of the things we need to be thinking about them is not, the monsters that are under the skin, but like, what does the concept of a low man mean in relation to this story about Bobby Garfield, right? That's something I want us to keep in mind as we learn more about them in the coming pages.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thematically, what does it mean that there's a kind of failed icon of masculinity, in contrast?
Sure, yeah.
That's just me riffing. I haven't thought about it for more than a second, but yeah, that's very interesting.
And maybe like, again, this is a thing I don't think we talked about a lot in the Dark Tower, but the signs of the low men, right? We see the lost pet posters, which we knew about before, kite tails hanging from telephone poles, hopscotch patterns with stars and moons on them. Very interesting choices to communicate the low men have here, right? Things usually associated with childhood, right? Lost pet posters. That's not necessarily childhood, but like, I don't know. I just have a very clear image in my mind of a kid losing their pet cat and like putting up a poster on phone poles and all that. The kite tails, I think that's much more clear. Hopscotch patterns, that's much more clear, a childhood symbol. Interesting choice to use those kind of symbols.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you could say about that. One thing that jumps to mind is just the idea that Ted kind of says that the low manners are sort of invisible. And he doesn't mean that metaphysically. He means that people have just like trained themselves not to notice that kind of person. And they sort of fall into the invisible world of children, which is also invisible to adults. And so you can get away, the low men have discovered that you can transmit information on the bandwidth of the child world because the adults just won't notice it. Because children are invisible. And that's another theme you could say. Children are invisible and disregarded, and their feelings don't matter. I think it's safe to say a theme.
Yeah, I like that. And a great connection to our last book, Insomnia.
Yeah. You asked what I thought about Ted's description. I think the thing that jumped out to me most was, so William Hurt is the voice the audiobook reader.
Yes.
And when he's just so good, and the way he reads this particular part where Ted describes the low men, it just was like just perfect. I know I'm going to have a lot to say about William Hurt, but he's sort of it's a very different way of doing audiobooks, and at first it actually rubbed me slightly wrong because I was like, he's not really doing voices at all. And then I came around on it because I was like, okay, he's not doing voices, but he is doing line reads. Like he's performing all of the characters in very specific ways. He's just not pitching his voice in a caricatured way.
Yeah, totally.
And I really love it.
I actually downloaded this audiobook when I heard it was William Hurt. I mean, I'm still reading it, but I'm also listening. I think I'm on chapter 3 of my listen. And it's delightful. It's really delightful. I think you pointed this out to me and I can't unhear it, is that William Hurt's reading of this book uses commas and periods as if they're guidelines and not necessarily things you have to strictly follow, because the place he chooses to pause and the place he chooses not to pause are really interesting. But it's a really, I don't know, I think it's perfect for Ted and when he's reading Ted, it's the most in line to me because he's got that perfect kind of old tired man affect to him. It's really good. It's
absolutely.
Really good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the result here is Bobby agrees to take the job, but he's also really sad because he immediately just kind of decides that Ted is kind of not right in the head, a little bit crazy, right? He like that he had gotten hints from Carol Gerber that Ted was a little bit weird because he would always kind of be looking over his shoulder and looking around as if someone was after him, and I think Bobby dismissed these things because he didn't want his perfect image of this new adult in his life to be tarnished in any way. But then he gets this and he's like, oh no.
Yeah, it is very sad, but utterly believable that Bobby's reaction would just be like, oh no, he's crazy.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder if Ted realizes that Bobby thinks this. That's unclear at this point.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's unclear, but in my opinion, yes. But I think he also has the confidence to know that he'll still do it.
Yeah.
Even if he thinks it's a little crazy.
I was leaning that way as well. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we end chapter 2 on a dramatic moment where Bobby's mother calls out to him and he's freaking out. And so we move on to chapter 3, A Mother's Power. Bobby does his job. Does he touch you? The last day of school. So yeah, as we said, as they're agreeing to terms, Bobby's mother comes looking for him. And I really love this part here. She'll see we've been up to something, Bobby thought with dismay. It's all over my face. No, Ted said to him, it is not. That is her power over you, that you believe it. It's a mother's power. Bobby stared at him amazed. Did you read my mind? Did you read my mind just then?
And then Ted just ignores it and hopes it goes away.
Yeah. I wonder if like that was an accident. He didn't like he spoke before he thought in that moment.
I figured that Ted probably didn't even realize that he hadn't spoken aloud, because that is the kind of thing that they would do in the Dark Tower, where they would literally be talking psychically and not realize that they were talking psychically.
Yeah, fair.
But yeah, it's so good. And it makes you suspicious that Ted has been reading his mind the whole time. So
yeah,
probably has been actually.
And I mean, like it again, we have to admit that we're coming to this knowing that Ted has the touch and is psychic already. So like this isn't a surprise to us, but like I think it's not exactly a surprise if you're a constant reader either, that it's a new character and they have powers. They have psychic powers. Like that's a very common King thing.
He's an old man. He's psychic.
So Ted gets Bobby's mother to agree to the new job, but she is very, very cautious about this whole thing. I think part of the caution can be chalked up simply to the general idea that like this strange new old man has taken a very specific interest in your young son. And I don't think you can fault her for that, but I do think it's a bit more than just that.
Yeah, it's a possessiveness on top of that, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love this line so much. You'll have to pay him extra to do the crossword for you, she said, getting up. And although Bobby didn't understand the remark, he was astonished by the cruelty he sensed in it, embedded like a piece of glass in a marshmallow. It was as if she wanted to make fun of Ted's failing eyesight and his intellect at the same time, as if she wanted to hurt him for being nice to her son. Bobby was still ashamed at deceiving her and frightened that she would find out. But now he was also glad, almost viciously glad. She deserved it. He's good at the crossword, my Bobby. Oh, isn't that so rich with everything we've been talking about all episode?
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. I love everything about this. I think that's what I love about her character is like she's the kind of bad person who you hate that you relate to. Because I mean, don't we all sometimes behave spitefully in ways that we regret? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's always risky saying stuff like that, because then people are like,
no one's gonna think you're a bad person, man.
What do you
They've
mean,
been listening
Matt?
to you for 1,000 hours.
What are you trying to say, Matt? No, but I do think this is like I love bad sympathetic people in stories, because they're my favorites, because it's one of the few places where you can really kind of examine the shitty parts of yourself.
No, I think you're spot on there for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's great because King does this thing where the second you maybe sympathize with Liz Garfield, she does something like this, where you're just like, you jerk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's some jealousy and spite there. I think she wants her son to herself for
Yeah.
sure. And I mean, I don't know. It's a complicated mix of stuff going on with this contentious relationship between the two of them for sure.
Yep, definitely. She keeps him at a distance, but also can't let him go, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then Bobby kind of goes home and goes to bed to think about his life. And we have this fucking sentence. In that year of his life, Bobby Garfield still waited for sleep with a child's welcoming confidence. On his back, heels spread to the corners of the bed, hands tucked into the cool under the pillow, so his elbows stuck up. How does he do that? Like, did you when I read that sentence, I was transported to doing this exact same thing when I was a young boy. That's like, I would lay down in my little twin bed this exact same way. Exactly. And I just, how?
Yeah. I don't know. He does. It's worth actually seriously asking the question, because he seems to have a much clearer memory of what it was to be a child. I mean, than I do. And it's funny because when I'm hanging out with my kids, I'll be reminded of things because I'll see them do the thing. I'm like, oh yeah, that I remember that. But even with that, like sort of helper, I don't remember things that King seems to remember.
I just wonder if it's like just a result of a lifetime of writing and writing a lot. Is that like you're constantly mining your memories to the point where they have much more present and apparent recall than you or I do. Like I don't think about the experience of being a child on a daily basis. Like if you're writing 2,000 words every day, rain or shine, holiday or no, you might just need to have those the specificity of those memories on constant recall. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it almost has to be the case, but I don't know. I really don't.
It's just wonderful. Like that's how I slept. That's how I slept as a kid. He's writing about me. How did he do it? There's a later scene where like he's got his window open, and that's like I don't know. Like when I was a kid, I was always like, I don't understand why adults don't have their windows open all the time, because it's awesome. Like in a car or in your house, you know, just like having a window open and having the breeze come through. And I was like, every time I'd roll down the car window, my parents would be like, Scott, roll up the window. And like every time I wanted to open the window in the house, especially when I lived in New Jersey when it wasn't like 105 degrees in the summer, I felt like I was not allowed to do that. And it's so funny because now I'm an adult and I never roll down my windows. Yeah. So I don't know what happened, right. But I don't know, just like the specificity of that too, where you're just like sleep in bed in that position with the window open, the breeze blowing through in summertime. I don't know. It's just, it took me back, man. It took me back.
Interesting. I don't have that particular memory. And as an adult, I don't let my kids open windows because I have a overriding fear that they're going to just like immediately jump out of the window.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably what it was.
Yeah.
I did like to like hang out the window a lot.
Well, Scott, there you go.
And when I was 6 years old, I was at my friend's house and we were sitting on the windowsill and I was leaning against the screen and the screen fell out and I fell out the window. I was fine. Okay. I was fine. There was a bush under me. I was fine.
Oh my God.
It was a second story window, but there was just a very large bush under. Like I literally got up and then just walked home fine and went, Mom, I fell out of a window.
This is such a dramatic story. I'm imagining your friend thinking you're dead. And this
I don't remember because his parents were there. I have no memory of like how my friend reacted or how my friend's parents reacted. I just have a very specific memory of just casually walking home to my house and telling my parents I fell out of a window.
Your friend probably like screamed and then ran to his parents and told them that you fell out a window, and then they went and looked for you and couldn't find your body. And then they were like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
So we've just learned why I was not allowed to keep windows open.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. We said we were going to move faster and we're just telling anecdotes about our childhood. So the book then passes by as we approach summer. And I got to say, Matt, we've been focusing a lot on the events, the plot events of the story so far. But some of my favorite parts of it are just the way Bobby's life just plays out, the normal and mundane. The King spends pages and pages in these first 4 chapters with just Bobby and SJ and Carol just, you know, hanging out, being kids, doing doing kids thing. There are things, there's adulthood encroaching on them from everywhere, like Ted's low men are slowly encroaching upon him. But King gives all this page space to them just being children. And it's some of my favorite stuff here.
Yeah, me too. There's just so much richness. And not a second of it is dull. He really hits you with the immediacy and the real felt drama of all these childhood struggles.
Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah.
Eventually, Bobby's mom just comes out with it and asks Bobby if Ted ever touches him. It's really kind of not clear how much Bobby understands what she means here. Like, I think on some level he does, but on some level he doesn't. And he answers, yeah, he like claps me on the back and stuff like that. But there is one instance of touching that he doesn't tell his mom about. And I'll read this passage and we can kind of talk about this. Okay, Ted said and smiled. He slipped his left hand up to the back of Bobby's neck. His right hand joined it. He looked solemnly into Bobby's eyes, and Bobby looked solemnly back. You'd tell me if you did, wouldn't you? You wouldn't try to, I don't know, to spare my feelings? No, Bobby said. He liked Ted's hands on the back of his neck and didn't like them just the same. It was where a guy in a movie might put his hands just before he kissed a girl. No, I'd tell. That's my job. So Bobby describes this kind of touching as bad, but not in the way his mom was thinking. But it's still wrong, still dangerous. What does he mean here, Matt? What is up with this touching specifically?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, part of me was thinking about the psychic powers and, later realizing that Ted has perhaps awakened something in Bobby and maybe connecting that to this physical touching here. But, it's hard to put your finger on, though. I don't really think that's it. I don't think that's what Bobby means. Mm. I mean, I was always uncomfortable with touch from anybody who wasn't in my immediate family, even though within my family we're very huggy. But like so like maybe it's just kind of an ambivalence about touch, where it's like he's desperate to be touched, but then it's kind of weird when an older man touches you no matter what. And I don't know. I don't have a good answer here. I'm kind of reaching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he means in any kind of sexual way, although it is interesting that like the one thing Bobby says is it's where a guy in a movie might put his hands just before he kissed a girl. So he's acknowledging the intimacy of the touch that's happening here, right? But I think you're right that we talked about this before, that Bobby is kind of desperate for a certain kind of physical interaction of kind of a loving parental touch and hug and things like that. And he kind of was fascinated with Ted for these parental fatherly things that he finds missing in his life, and I think part of that is that. And I think you're right that the danger of it is that Ted is not his father. Ted is this random old man that something's going on with him. We don't know what. I think at this point Ted has already zoned out once. We haven't talked about that yet, but he's already done like a weird zone out thing.
Yeah.
And so there's some danger in getting too close and too beyond just like casual friends with this man.
Yeah. I think it's something in the space of that. I think I'm just having a hard time putting my finger on it.
Sure. And it's about this time, like right after he just told Ted that no, he would definitely tell him if he saw any signs of the low men. It's about this time that Bobby catches his first sight of the low men. He sees a kite string hanging from a TV antenna, and then he sees a hopscotch with a star and a moon next to it. Which, Matt, quick audiobook question. In the book itself, there's a picture of a hopscotch with a star and a moon next to it. Do you recall how that was handled in the audiobook? Because the line is like, it looked something like this and had a colon and then had a picture of a hopscotch with a star and a moon next to it.
I think he just described it. I don't remember it being weird in any way, actually.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, Bobby's reaction to this is like, shit. I thought Ted was crazy, but here's exactly the stuff he told me to look out for. And he doesn't know what to do here. But here we see at the end of the chapter, adulthood is accretive by nature, a thing which arrives in ragged stages and uneven overlaps. Bobby Garfield made the first adult decision in his life on the day he finished the 6th grade, concluding it would be wrong to tell Ted about the stuff he had seen, at least for the time being.
No.
I love this. I love this though, because he believes him now, kind of like he's seen the signs and he believes him, or at least he believes him enough to know that if he tells Ted about these things, Ted will leave, and he's not ready for Ted to leave. So there's a lot of selfishness that's motivating this decision, that he likes Ted, he likes hanging out with Ted, he likes Ted being in his life, and he wants that sweet bike. He's getting that $1 a week.
That's right.
So he's mostly motivated by selfishness to avoid telling Ted about this stuff.
That's true. It is selfishness. It is, it's very sad that this is considered to be like an adult decision, which is a selfish and just, it's the wrong decision. It's obviously the wrong decision, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although interestingly enough, I didn't pull this, so we're jumping ahead a little bit, but when Ted is going blank, Bobby almost starts to tell him that he saw these things, and Ted just kind of, shrugs it off as, oh no, they're in the West, it's fine. He doesn't go right out and tell him, but I don't know. Anything about that?
I mean, I don't know. No, not yet.
Sure. Just food for thought.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 4, our last chapter of the week. Ted goes blank. Bobby goes to the beach. McCown, the Winkle. So this final chapter starts with Bobby witnessing Ted go blank, as the title says. We know kind of right away that he's using his power to like attempt to locate the low man, right? Because we kind of can read between the lines for that. But we get a lot of stuff here. I must be very still. I must be a hare in the bush. They may pass by. There will be water if God wills it, and they may pass by. All things serve what? Almost whispering now. Serve what, Ted? All things serve the beam, Ted said, and suddenly his hand closed over Bobby's. They were very cold, those hands, and for a moment Bobby felt nightmarish, fainting terror. It was like being gripped by a corpse that could only move his hands and the pupils of its dead eyes. So there's the beam reference, Matt.
The beam reference. Oh, God, the extremely specific Dark Tower references are really working on me like gangbusters.
It's always fun. When you're reading a King story and you see something like all things serve the beam, or there are other worlds than these, and Ka, and like it's just fun stuff.
Yeah, it makes me happy.
Mm-hmm. So in his attempts to wake Ted out of this trance, though, Bobby is grabbed by him, and well, if we were reading this for the first time, we wouldn't understand what was happening here. But because of our unique Dark Tower situation, we know exactly what happens next. Ted is a facilitator. He facilitates the psychics around them, and he uses his facilitator power, probably accidentally, on young Bobby, giving him a little bump in his super abilities. Something our protagonist is not aware of at the time, of course.
Yes. Although, I actually think even a person unfamiliar with the Dark Tower would put two and two together and realize that Ted's presence has galvanized this ability.
Yeah, I think that's a fair conclusion. I'm curious how many first-time readers would have gotten there. I can't say because I didn't read this till after Dark Tower, but yeah. I don't know. Here's a great line that we need to talk about kind of in relation to a lot of what we've been talking about already this week. Back in the apartment, Bobby grabbed his toy cars and trucks from various stashes under his bed and at the back of his closet. A couple of these, a Matchbox Ford and a blue metal dump truck Mr. Biderman had sent home with his mom a few days after Bobby's birthday, were pretty cool, but he had nothing to rival Sully's gasoline tanker or yellow Tonka bulldozer. The dozer was especially good to play with in sand. Bobby was looking forward to at least an hour serious road building while the waves broke nearby and his skin pinkened in the bright coastal sunshine. It occurred to him that he hadn't gathered up his trucks like this since sometime last winter, when he and SJ had spent a happy post-blizzard Saturday afternoon making a road system in the fresh snow down Commonwealth Park. He was old now, 11, almost too old for stuff like this. There was something sad about that idea, but he didn't have to be sad right now, not if he didn't want to. His toy truck days might be fast approaching their end, but the end wouldn't be today. Nope, not today.
Yeah, it's great. It's perfect because he's aware of the fact that he will be too old for this soon, but not yet. It's funny. This struck me so tenderly. Like just remembering being basically exactly this age, maybe a little bit older, and being extremely careful that like the only toys I was gonna play with are like Warhammer 40K miniatures with like blood and skulls and stuff on them. But you're not, they're not toys. They're these are miniatures.
Yeah,
These
of
are
course,
figurines.
Matt, of course. You weren't playing with toys. No.
No.
There is something interesting here. I mean, like, honestly, the first time I read this, and this is, I think my bias is just coming out, I was a little surprised to hear that Bobby was like going to bring toys to the beach. Like, I don't know. I know he's only 11, but as the in between space they're operating right now, it just seemed like that was too kiddie for him. Like just this idea that he's going to go to the beach. And I mean, it's just the idea, I think in my head, the same day that he kisses Carol on the Ferris wheel, he's also going to be like dump trucking roads in the sand down by the beach. Like, it just, those two things seem discongruous with each other.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the interesting thing is maybe we missed it, but there's no part in the book where he actually does play with his cars on the sand, right? Like, I don't think that actually happens in the chapter.
You're right. Yeah, I don't recall that he actually does. So maybe he has gotten too old for it and didn't even realize it.
Yeah, I mean, like it's they spend their time at the amusement park, and like he does basically teenagey things, like just hanging out and playing the Midway games, and then going up in the Ferris wheel with a girl. Like, it turns into a very teen day and not a very 10-year-old gonna play in the sand with dump truck day.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
like his insistence that nope, not today. I think the events of today prove him wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he finishes out the day, playing 3-card monte with a card sharp. So it ends up being it's a trajectory, if you will, of going from childhood to being like a cynical old man by the end.
For sure. So Bobby asks his mom for some money for the beach and for the rides at the amusement park, and she refuses, telling him he should use his own money that he has saved up for his bike. And then we see Bobby read his mother's mind here, knowing that she's squirreling money away herself in a Sears catalog in her closet and a blue pitcher in the kitchen dish cabinet. I think this is actually, King is doing something extremely clever all the way throughout this chapter. He's doing a bit of a magic trick of himself here. Because at this point in the book, if you're reading it without the knowledge that we have, we aren't like told Bobby has psychic powers, right? And in this moment, when Bobby seems to like know his mother's secrets, we're specifically told by the book that he found the blue pitcher a few years ago. And that's why he knows where that is. And King kind of distracts us with that fact and just doesn't say anything about the Sears catalog. And so we kind of fall into the misdirection and don't question the idea of how Bobby would know about that. It's like this really fun trick he's doing. And he does it multiple times throughout this story, where Bobby basically spends the rest of this chapter reading everyone around him mind. And it's not until we get to the 3-card Monte guy that actually becomes what is textually happening. It's just very, very clever.
Yeah, I love it. I agree. I didn't detect it. I didn't see it coming. But then when it does come, you're like, I gotcha. Yeah.
I am curious what your thoughts about Liz Garfield are after this section, this particularly nasty section where she decides to lecture her son about savings and everything.
Well, I think it becomes a bit more clear kind of where her head is at, because you realize that she's under a ton of stress surrounding money, and maybe has a lot of guilt and shame about how she earns her money, because we strongly suspect that there's something illicit going on with her boss. And I think that, and then, like I said earlier, I think this is all culminated in her just being really unhappy with where she is in her life. She's just not living the life that she ever wanted to live. And I think that's the crux of it. The thing keeping her from being present and loving as a mother is that she's just incredibly unhappy and stuck and angry with her situation. And, when this is all evident, you can't really be all that mad at her anymore.
Sure. I understand that. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, who is she hiding this money from, right? Like, it's one thing to have a pitcher of coins, under your sink or whatever. It's another thing to aggressively like tape bills inside of a catalog you're shoving up in your closet, right? That is specifically hiding money so someone doesn't find the money. So who is she hiding it from? Like, it's probably not Bobby. Like, that's not, I don't think she'd go to that length to hide money from Bobby. So you got to wonder, why is she squirreling this money away in this very, very secretive manner? And who is she not wanting to find it?
I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is the fact that they have boarders in their house. And if you were going to have boarders in your house, then who you didn't trust, then you might want to put money in hiding places instead of just in.
Aren't they separate apartments? I didn't. Maybe not. I
literally don't know. You could be totally right. I thought it was like the upper story of their house, but it could absolutely be a separate apartment. I might have just gotten a crosswire there.
No, you might be right.
Because I thought they lived in a house, like a. Just like I thought it was just a house, but
yeah, because I think Ted says your key or mine at one point. So the key that accesses the house is the same key. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is there another answer?
I mean, there might be. I'm not going to tell you.
Okay, fine. There's an invisible man who was looking for her money in her house.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. This is a stealth Invisible Man sequel.
Yeah. Okay.
So despite feeling belittled and angry by his mother, Bobby manages to keep his mouth shut and listen to her beratement and ends up borrowing 50 cents from his own savings and then goes to have a great, wonderful time at the amusement park using his money. I love this line here. They're at the Midway and everyone's kind of winning prizes and Bobby wins a prize. He wins a little stuffed animal and he gives it to, I think, Carol Gerber's younger brother. And Carol's mother says, it's great and he loves it, but don't you want to take it home to your mother? And his response is, nah, she's not much on stuff like that. I'd like to win her a bottle of perfume though, which is really interesting, right? I mean, like we see that SJ's relationship with his mother is he gave her the bear he won last year and is trying to win her another one. But Bobby is like, no, not a bear. Like I want to get like a bottle of perfume. Yeah. That's so specific.
Am I going to be the first one to use the word, Scott? You're going to make me say the word first?
Yes, say it.
Okay. So there's some Oedipal shit going on here, Scott. and there's in a lot of ways, right? And King always kind of brushes up against this. I do wonder how far we're going to go. I don't think we're gonna go weird necessarily. I think it's just more like the complicated feelings that are happening in this household where there's just Bobby and his mom and he's kind of confused about what his role is in the world exactly and thinks maybe he needs to get his mom some perfume.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think we're definitely playing in that realm for sure. I think that, a bottle of perfume has specific connotations, right? That is not the typical gift that I think a son would give their mother.
Yeah, I mean, maybe when they're like much older, and it's like, and it's like you're. You know that your mom likes this specific perfume. Maybe then, right? But as a kid, that's not even something that would occur to you. I wouldn't think. Probably. Sure. I don't know.
I've never bought my mom a bottle of perfume. So
no, I bought my mom like soaps and stuff, which she basically has asked for. So that's why I bought them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So eventually, Bobby ends up on the Ferris wheel with his not girlfriend, Carol, and they share their first kiss, their first two kisses, actually. And again, I think this is King playing magician's misdirection here, Matt, because after the first kiss, Carol wants another one. And we see here that it's because she wasn't paying attention. We see Carol thinks it was because she wasn't paying attention. And I think, and this is why I set this up earlier in the episode, I think what King is doing here is he's already kind of randomly jumped into Carol's point of view a couple times throughout the book so far. And I think what he's doing here was laying the tracks for, we've just randomly jumped into Carol's point of view again. And that's why we can know that in her thoughts, she says she wants a second kiss because she wasn't paying attention enough for the first one. But that is actually not what's happening here. What's happening here is Bobby is just hearing her thoughts. He just heard her think that she wanted another kiss because she wasn't paying attention to the first one. And we don't catch that because I think it's been established that we kind of pop into Carol's head every so often. Mm-hmm. It's just really clever stuff to mask what's going on here until the exact moment that he wants to reveal it, which is our great conclusion of the chapter, which is the 3-card Monty game.
I mean, I mistakenly thought that she had asked for another kiss, which
she does. No, she does ask for it. She does say it out loud, but she thinks internally because she wasn't paying attention to the first, because this was her first kiss and she felt like she wasn't paying attention enough to enjoy it.
Okay. That's good. No, I'm not crazy. Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't quite put all that together, but I do enjoy the sleight of hand that you've described here. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's another connection I want to point out to you, Matt. Bobby said the narration here says it was his first real kiss too. And Bobby never forgot the feel of her lips pressing on his, dry and smooth and warmed by the sun. It was the kiss by which all others in his life would be judged and found wanting. And I'm going to take you back, Matt. I'm going to take you back to Dark Tower, Book 7, right after Jake has received his first and sadly last kiss. Ted is there, and Ted looked at him and smiled. "You'll judge the rest of them by that first one," he said. "Take it from me. I know." So that's a great connection between Low Men and Yellowcoats and the Dark Tower here. I really love that detail.
Yeah. Well, you didn't need to take me back to it because I remembered because I'm still mad about it.
Yeah, I know. That's why I remembered it off the top of my head, honestly, is because I just remember the tragedy of, King really playing up the fact that this was his first kiss and how much that's going to mean to him. And it's his only kiss. And
he wouldn't do something so cruel. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's the Dark Tower. It's book 7.
It's interesting because Ted is the one who says this, right? You'll judge the rest of them by the first one, which echoes the narration here is like the kiss which by all others of his life would be judged. But Ted isn't here. He's not he's not there. He's not present. But he knows Bobby Garfield very well. This is when I remind you that the first time Ted sees Jake in book 7, he thinks he's Bobby Garfield. Like he looks and reminds him so much like him that the first thing he says is, "Bobby Garfield, that can't be you." Yeah. And so there's a big connection at least in Ted's mind between Jake and Bobby. And so here's kind of King crafting that connection here.
Yeah. So Bobby is yet another character who should have been played by River Phoenix.
Although I think it says that Bobby has red hair.
Yeah, he has
red hair. Jake did not have red hair. So
well, yeah, that's true. But I think
Ted's wishful thinking here.
I believe it also says though that Bobby has extremely short, if not buzz cut, then at least super short hair. So maybe maybe the hair color is just not very apparent.
That could be.
Yeah, I don't know.
So at the end of the day, it's finally time to go home. But on their way out of the Midway, they come across our friend playing 3-card Monty. It's a low man. That's what Bobby sees immediately. It's a low man, not one of the ones in the yellow coats, but a low man just the same. And we watch as he successfully takes money from Sully John and then Carol's aunt. But then Bobby wants to play, and he manages to beat the low man at his own game. It's really wonderful, really escalation here where we see the guy trick them by, having them win the first time. And then SJ loses 15 cents, and then Carol's aunt loses a whole $1. And then Bobby says, "Oh, I want to play." And they're all like, "Yeah, let him lose his 15 cents. It's fine." But he kicks this guy's ass, Matt. He kicks his ass.
Yeah, this felt very Dark Tower, and it's a shift in tone. It's a decided shift in tone toward more adult, mentation within the narration. I would say it's great. It's exciting, but also go ahead.
No, it's just his encounter with a low man, not the specific titular low man, but there is something much more serious about this. There's stakes to this that in his life that he hasn't ever really faced. And I'm not just talking about the money. It's just there's this guy feels dangerous. He feels bad.
Yeah. I love books about the past because it's a whole $2 changed hands here and everybody's really upset. There's a lot of hurt feelings.
Yeah, I think there was when they're talking about the Winkle later in the book, there's my dad had the Winkle once and won $50 and was able to buy us groceries for a whole month.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Jesus.
Yeah.
That would buy me half a week's.
Right. Yeah. That's a couple. It's a couple nice lunches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff though.
Yeah. So he wins, of course, we know, because he's been enhanced by Ted. But I want to ask this question directly, Matt. Does Bobby have the touch normally, in your opinion, and Ted just made it stronger, or is part of Ted's facilitating power just to give powers to those that maybe wouldn't normally have it?
Well, when we were watching Dr. Sleep this last couple of weeks, Dan Torrance describes the touch as something that some people have where it's really just like knowing that your spouse had a rough day and that you should give them flowers. So like very, very low key, the touch being somewhat common. So my suspicion would be, yeah, Bobby probably has a very mild form of the touch they never would have noticed as being a psychic power. He just would have come off as an empathic person, maybe, and a sensitive man, a sensitive boy. But I think Ted amplified this into something overt where it's like, oh, you can just read people's minds literally.
I like that interpretation, that like normally just not a level that he can be aware of it. But I think this also teases out the strength of Ted's facilitating, which we know from the Dark Tower is extremely, extremely strong. That like he increased the power of the breakers like exponentially.
Right. Yeah. It was that's why they're so desperate to get him specifically.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So Bobby heads home and lies in bed thinking about the day. And this is when King finally reveals to us that, yes, he was indeed reading people's thoughts. He knew all these things because they knew them. He read his mother's mind when they were fighting. He read Carol's mind when she was on the Ferris wheel. And then Mr. McCown, the Carney hustler as well. He knew where the Queen was, and therefore Bobby did as well. There's this one part that I really like. We kind of see the power fading where he's talking to his mom right when he gets home, and he can tell something's bothering her. She's not concerned with him because something else is on her mind. And he's like, but what is it, Mom? What's on your mind? And he knows that he can't read her mind anymore. So it's like we kind of see the power fade from him.
Yeah, you would need another boost from Ted, which does suggest that he either has a very, very weak form of it, or could be he doesn't have any at all. It's entirely possible that Ted can just give people the touch.
That'd be really cool.
I don't know.
I do have one question for you though. There's at the end of the 3-card Monty game, there's the scene where like he plays him twice, right? He plays him the first time for 15 cents, wins 30. He goes double or nothing, and gets 90 cents from him. And then I think the Carney tries to get him to play again, and he says, no, if I played again, I'd lose. That's really interesting, right? Is it because McCown would have just cheated on that last one? Would have just generally cheated? Or is it because he could sense his power fading?
I mean, my guess was that he just knew that the guy would take the card off the table entirely.
Yeah,
and
either cheat or just refuse to pay out and just like take his money and sprint.
That too, absolutely, because you're in a situation where the guy. It's not like the cops are going to be like, yes, hand over your illegally won gamblings. So
yeah, I mean, this guy could be extremely dangerous, right? And
right. Yeah,
there's a few kids, like, so. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, I really liked his saying that out loud almost acknowledges that he's just got McCown's number so well that like, I know if I did it again, you would screw me over. It's really good. It's really good.
Yeah.
So the chapter ends with this: watch out, Bobbio. If you don't watch out, you'll wind up as nuts as Ted with his low men. Far off, in the town square, the clock began bonging the hour of 10. Bobby turned his head and looked at the alarm clock on his desk. Big Ben claimed it was only 9:52. Which is another sign of the low men, right? That clocks start going off at the wrong hour. So at the same time, he says, I've got psychic powers. No, I'm going to be as crazy as Ted and his low men. We get another sign of the low men.
Yeah, I love it.
It's really good. And I love here that like what happens here, like this is an incredibly scary, like adult, scary thought. And what does Bobby do? He starts just thinking about Carol Gerber and said, hey, maybe I do have a girlfriend. And that's what he falls asleep to.
Which is a very, a more grown up thought.
Yep. That is very true. And that is the end of chapter 4. And that's the end of our reading this week. We did it, Matt. There's no discussion questions this week, and yet somehow still going to have a 2-hour episode, but we did it.
Let's just tell ourselves that it's because it's the opening of a book and those always take longer.
Sure. That's what it is. As we said, no discussion question answers to read this week, but we do have one for you next week, and it's a good one. Matt, what is the question for next week?
For next week's discussion question, what book made you fall in love with reading?
Yeah, so what is your Lord of the Flies, your Bobby Garfield experiencing Lord of the Flies? What is that book for you?
Lord of the Rings.
We're asking this question. I don't actually know what my answer would be off the top of my head. I really need to spend some time thinking about this because I'm sure I can come up with an answer. It's just not one that popped into my head right away.
Yeah, me too. I probably fell in love with reading when I was, probably around Bobby's age, actually.
Yeah.
And honestly, there are some books that I read back in that period of time. I don't even remember what they were. So it's entirely possible. I don't remember the book that, like, I used to read these like comedy Star Trek spoof novels, like unlicensed Star Trek spoofs. And it's like, I love those. I remember laughing uproariously while reading them. And it's like, yeah, is that it? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, you folks at home should let us know what yours are. Spend some time, think about this one, because as we know, a good book, makes you think. So come up with some good answers. We can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. And that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, Low Men and Yellow Coats will continue with chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. Another 4-chapter one, Matt. Oh no, it's going to be a long episode.
Yeah, plus discussion question. It's going to be 3 hours. Yeah. Well, anyway, remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit r/doofmedia is a great place to hang out or talk about these chapters.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is a great time to do it. You can find us on every single podcast platform out there. Go out there, pick the one of your choice, subscribe, and make sure you never miss another episode of our podcast ever.
That's right. And if you like Kingslingers or any of our other shows on the Doof Network and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. This week, we want to send out a special thanks to our new patrons, Bobby J and Better Than Stormcrow. That's a Lord of the Rings reference. So welcome. And Bobby J, that's a Low Men and Yellow Coats reference.
Oh man, I was about to make a joke. You said that's a Lord of the Rings reference, and I would be like, yeah, my favorite elf is Bobby J. If you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is, of course, absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast, talking about us on social media, just doing your thing. Lots of people doing the thing this past couple weeks. I've tried to like and share the ones when you share us, so thank you for continuing to do that. I'm slow on the Twitter sometimes, so apologies, but it really does help when you guys do those things. So thank you for doing them. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's spotlight review comes from Datum. Is that Datum O or Datum Q? Datum O, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great companion for the epic journey. Having just reread Lord of the Rings, I started the Dark Tower series again and found this podcast at the same time. What a great way to enjoy this epic series. The insightful analysis and fun conversations have added so much to the story that I already loved. Can't wait to listen to the rest as I complete my journey with these 2 constant readers along for the ride." Well, Datum, thank you so much. That was so nice of you. And folks, I have some terrible news, Matt.
Oh no.
We only have one more podcast review in the docket. So next week's review, unless we get new ones, will be the final review we have, which is, it can't happen. It can't happen.
God.
So we need new reviews immediately. Please. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, go there, hit 5 stars, and then write a couple words, maybe just like five words. Yeah. 5 words. That's it.
And we'll read it like immediately, like the next week, because it'll be the
right
other
away.
one. So yeah.
Maybe we need to like start making threats. Like if we don't get a new review for the episode 2 weeks from now, Matt will be permanently banned from reading one Stephen King book for each week that we go without new reviews.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to do that to Matt, would you?
That's a good idea, Scott. Let's start working on the list of books that you're going to take from me.
Yeah, how could you do this to Matt, everyone? How could you do this to him? Oh my God. Well, that's going to do it for us this week, folks. We'll see you back here next week for more low men in yellow coats, long days, and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.